This lens is easily one of the most underappreciated and disrespected lenses amongst all camera brands. And of course, I'm talking about the 24-105 f4. Now, this lens is usually seen as the perfect travel lens where you just need a variety of focal lengths, and depending on the situation, you just have the freedom to choose what you need at that given point in time. But in this video, I'm going to talk about why this lens is usually the one that's glued to my camera 90% of the time, even when I'm doing paid client work. Let's get into it. What's up, everyone? I'm Matthew Henry. I'm a portrait and sports photographer based in West Central Texas. I'm relatively new to YouTube, and this is only my second video, so if you're here and you're watching, I appreciate it. We're going to get down into business. So, 24-105 f4 is easily one of the most underappreciated lenses amongst all camera brands. Right? Every major camera manufacturer has a lens similar to that. Focal range might be a little bit different. Say, for instance, Nikon, they have a 24-120 f4, but the reasoning's still the same. The reason I'm making this video is because last couple of weeks, I'm a part of a number of Facebook groups based around photography, and an individual posed a question about potentially jumping from a DSLR to a mirrorless system in his camera brand, which I believe was Nikon, and he was trying to get advice on whether or not he should stay with Nikon or jump to a completely different camera brand. Someone commented and gave him a list of lenses that he could use if he were to stay with Nikon. One of those happened to be the 24-120 f4. And in that comment, that person mentioned that they use it for portrait work and their clients can't tell the difference. And apparently that just set somebody off. And they went off about using an f4 for client work is wild. I'm like, why? I use this lens 90% of the time when I'm working with paying clients. And I'm gonna go over why that is here in just a bit. But this lens can really do it all. And the biggest knock that most people give it is because it's an f4. f4 is still extremely usable in a lot of cases, especially with your modern day mirrorless cameras. Low light capabilities have come a long way amongst all camera brands, especially when it comes to photography. The sensors have gotten better, and the ability to photograph in low light has really just increased and made it easier amongst all camera manufacturers. And the difference between f4 and let's say f2.8 is only one stop of light. As you can see, I have the Canon version of the 24-105 f4 as I shoot with Canon camera bodies. This is commonly seen as more of a kit lens because you can buy this lens brand new with any new Canon camera. But this is an L series lens, as you can see by the red ring near the front of the lens. No crazy customization options with this lens. You do have this customizable knob for most RF lenses, so you can change that to change your white balance, change your ISO, and a bunch of other different options if you choose to do that. I normally just leave it alone. I don't really mess with it. But other than that, no crazy button layout on the rest of the lens. You got your standard autofocus and manual focus selector switch. This is an image stabilized lens, so you can turn off the stabilization if you do so choose. The barrel does lock, and it's got this locking switch here, so when you unlock it, you can zoom out to whatever you need to. When you're traveling, you can just simply lock it back, and it's not going to move on you. As far as the zoom throw, it's relatively short. It's nice. It's smooth. It's not super tight. You can just twist with 2 fingers, and like I said, it's a relatively short throw. It does extend out, so this is not an internal zooming lens, but it is L series, so that means it is weather sealed, so you're not really going to run into issues with dust or a little bit of rain. So this is a well-built lens for what it is. And a lot of people view it as a kit lens, which I think is wrong. Oh, also before I forget, filter thread has a 77mm filter thread, so you can get relatively cheap and inexpensive ND filters, CPL filters, mist filters if you so choose. That size is relatively common, and you can pretty much find them anywhere. Like I said, they're not too expensive depending on what brand you get. But all in all, good quality L series lens. Not super heavy and feels good in the hands. Closest comparison to this would be the 24-70, which is a very common lens amongst all camera brands at f2.8. And like I said, that one-stop difference is not as dramatic as you think when it comes to low light capabilities. But the other reason a lot of people don't like f4 is because the amount of separation you get from your subject versus their background. And I don't think that's necessarily an accurate statement. You can still separate and get a decent amount of separation with enough depth of field in your background with an f4 lens, If you're zoomed out to 85 and you've got a lot of distance between your subject and the background, they are still going to be blurred out. It may not be as creamy looking as people like to say when it comes to bokeh, but there's still enough separation. You can still give someone that 3D cutout from their background at 85 millimeters with enough distance from the background. Like I said, this is a widely slept on lens, and I'm going to go over my top reasons why I use this 90% of the time for my client work and the situations where I do use it in the most. So we're going to get into that. The first reason this lens is usually my #1 go-to is versatility. Like I've already stated, this lens is extremely versatile. If I find myself in a situation where I'm photographing more than one person in a single setting, like recently I did an entire cheer squad that was about 16 people total. Well, technically it was 20 people total. We did a team picture first, and then 16 stayed for the remaining individual photos. And simply just using this lens, I could fly through that shoot and knock out all 16 images with multiple looks, multiple poses, and I did all that in maybe about 2 hours. Had I have had nothing but primes and having to change a lens every time I need to get a different look, that would have went from 2 hours to probably 3.5, almost 4 hours. So this definitely helps me with speed and efficiency, getting the images I need, getting the looks I need, without having to waste unnecessary time constantly changing out lenses to get the various looks that I need. I'm going to throw up an image that I did recently from that shoot. As you can see, this was at 53 millimeters and at f8. So more times than not, I'm really not shooting wide open, and I'll go into another image here in just a second where I am shooting wide open, but versatility, man, you can't beat a lens like this. So second reason for why this lens is usually my go-to when I'm doing client work or paid work, this lens is fantastic for portraits, even though it's only at f4. Simply because it's f4 does not mean that you cannot get clear, sharp portraits out of this lens. I'm going to throw up another example from a shoot I did a little while ago, but this was for a soccer player, and you can see that I took this at 50 millimeters, and it is indeed at f4. And a lot of complaints is that you can't get as much background separation using an f4 lens versus, say, a 1.8 or a 1.2 prime. Yes, you can, and this is proof of it. Technically, this is wide open for this lens since it's only a constant f4, but if I were to stop down even further to say f8, f11, this image would be a lot sharper than what it currently is. And you can see right now, you can see how crystal clear the clarity is. The color rendition is fantastic. The sharpness, and her eyes are tack sharp. So you can't really beat this. And why people complain about an f4 lens or say f4 is not good enough to do portrait work, it's completely false. Reason number 3 is low light capabilities. This can definitely perform in low light. If you take in what settings you actually need, say you're only photographing something that's stationary and not moving and you don't need super fast shutter speed, if you slow your shutter speed down, the image stabilization inside the lens plus the in-body stabilization of, say, your camera body will give you more than usable results in low light. So this can definitely perform, like I said, once you take those things into account. Now, if you're photographing something that's moving and you need a fast shutter speed to stop that action, well, then this may not be the best tool for the job. But all things considered, if you're just taking a landscape photo or you're just doing a stationary portrait with low light, there are ways you can use f4 to your advantage. Keeping in mind the versatility of this lens to get usable images to still do what you need. Now, the last reason I'm going to list for this video for why this is my most used and most often gone to lens is video performance. Kind of similar to my previous point with low light, when you're using video, you're obviously not using super fast shutter speeds, right? Depending on what frame rate you're filming in, you may be at 1/50 or 1/124 or 1/250th of a second just to match whatever you need. This can't perform, and I've used this personally on indoor situations when I was filming a basketball game a couple months ago, and this was literally the only lens I had on my body. 7200 I have, but in that instance it's a little too tight to get the right framing when you're sitting underneath the basket. But this 24-105, man, it's definitely punches well above its weight. I say if you need anything for video, more times than not, f4 is usually enough. A lot of videographers that I know typically don't shoot wider than f4 simply because it helps with keeping the subject in focus, especially when you're dealing with a frame that gets really crowded with a bunch of people and you're trying to keep, you know, your intended subject in focus. f4 usually will do a better job of that than it would be at f2.8. And now this is after the 24-105 f2.8 version came out. I haven't used that one yet, but that lens is a lot bigger than this one, and for convenience sake, I prefer to keep things relatively small. Well, there you have it. Those are my reasons why the Canon RF 24-105 f4 is my most used lens, and usually the one that I'm pulling first in any given situation. Like I said, I'm fairly certain that sentiment is similar amongst all camera manufacturers, whether you've got Sony, Panasonic, Nikon, Fuji. They all have a lens that is similar in range to that one with, I'm sure, the same capabilities. That's all I got for y'all. I'm not going to keep y'all. I'm still relatively new to this YouTube thing, so I appreciate you liking and subscribing to this video. And if you like it, come back for more. Hopefully I have something that interests you. See y'all later.